Hey everybody, my name is Kevin Pereira. I am currently a solutions architect at SHI. It is a consulting company. I am here today to talk to you guys about CI/CD in Azure DevOps for SQL Fabric database. Much like what John said, DevOps is something that's near and dear to me. I used it daily for about 9 years. I don't use it as much currently in this role, but it's still something that I'm very passionate about. I sort of grew up in the SQL community, if you will. I've spent the last couple of decades working with SQL and Oracle and just about anything with databases. And my career basically evolved from being a SQL developer to a report developer to then an ETL BI developer, and eventually just kind of becoming that jack of all trades and master of some. Where I started working, with DevOps, and we started working with architecture and networking, things of that nature, until just a couple of years ago, whenever Fabric came out, and then I started working with Fabric, and I really enjoyed the solution. So I decided to just, go ahead and continue pursuing it. Here on the slide, you can see I'm sharing my LinkedIn profile as well as my Blue Sky handle. Feel free to follow me if you would like. I definitely appreciate the support. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on either one of those platforms. So tonight, we're going to actually be covering the topic of CI/CD for SQL database in Fabric. But in order to do that, we kind of need to sort of talk about the application lifecycle management of a database change, right? So we're going to cover that a little bit, and then we're going to very, very quickly, in a very shallow way, discuss our basic architecture of a SQL database in Fabric. After that, we are going to talk a lot. We're going to spend a lot of time in Azure DevOps. So we're going to, at a really high level, talk about what are repositories, what are pipelines, what are releases. We're going to be creating a repo in a demo. We're going to configure the integration between Git and Fabric for this particular SQL database, which is our topic. We're going to create a ADO pipeline or build. We're going to create a deployment or release, and then we're just going to go end to end with a full change from beginning to end to demonstrate the entire application lifecycle management of database change. So just kind of diving into that, when you really think about application lifecycle management, it usually comes in just sort of three phases, right? The first phase is develop. You actually start making changes. You get assigned a task at your job saying, hey, we need to go ahead and add this widget to this application. We need to create a report, or in the case of a database, you might need to go and update a store procedure, create a new view, add tables, etc. So the life cycle is fairly similar. And so here in develop phase, it kind of goes the way that you would expect, right? You go and create your feature branch. That's going to be the branch that you are going to actually work in. You're going to make your T-SQL changes that you might need for this particular database. You're going to commit all of your changes to your branch once you're done. And then you're going to create a pull request into the main branch, right? So once that pull request process is completed, your pull request is reviewed and approved depending on the maturity level of your organization when it comes to DevOps, the next step usually is going to be the build. This is the step where there's automation that runs, and then it validates the T-SQL code that you have actually implemented here. So when it comes to SQL database and Fabric, similar to SQL Server and Azure SQL Database, if you're using the SQL package extension, which is what Microsoft has developed and recommends, what happens is there's a DAC file that gets generated. And so the way that this works is your database is associated with a database project, and then you perform the build. It generates a DAC file, which is going to become the artifact that you then use for deployment. So moving on to the next stage of the life cycle is going to be the deploy, right? And so here typically what happens, especially in a tool like Azure DevOps, this is where your release is going to take place. And so the way that the SQL package executable works is it grabs that DAC artifact that you generated in your build and is going to go ahead and compare it to a target. The target would be the database that you're trying to deploy against. You might be working locally and going to a dev environment. You might be working in a shared environment in development and aiming to go to test and then to go to pre-prod and then to go to prod. So each one of those stages in your release is actually going to be performing this comparison uh, action, where it's going to compare the artifact that you've committed, the DAC path, to the target database. It's going to figure out a delta, what has changed, and then it's going to apply those changes that it has detected. So we can't really have this discussion on CI/CD for SQL Database and Fabric without really talking about what SQL Database and Fabric is. So let's go ahead and do that. I think going on, a year ago, Microsoft just kind of announced the public preview of SQL Database for Fabric. And this is just kind of their play at adding the transactional database into the Fabric platform, turning the Fabric platform from being a analytics only platform to a complete data platform in Microsoft speak. So the way that Microsoft actually likes to define this product is that it is a developer-friendly transactional database that allows you to create OLTP databases in Fabric, and it uses the same database engine as Azure SQL Database. And that's important. Why is it important as it pertains to this specific presentation? Well, a couple of reasons. It's not brand new, right? It is the same engine that people have been using in Azure for probably upwards of 10 years now, and it's very similar to the engine that people have been using in on-prem for a bit longer. But as it pertains to Azure DevOps and as it pertains to CI/CD, it matters because it's also not a new product. It's actually tried and true. People do deployments to Azure SQL databases and manage instances in SQL Server all the time with this particular tool. So the fact that it's the same engine allows to accelerate that pace as opposed to having to create something completely brand new that may be buggy and not fully work. So
While you're talking about that, Kevin, I just want to interrupt one quick question.
yeah.
In Azure SQL Database, you have two flavors, general purpose and business critical. Which one it is, and do you get a chance to pick the level of compute?
Yes, thank you for that question. You don't get to pick this is actually, that is a great question, by the way. It is actually going to be the serverless flavor of it. So in Fabric, you get to select your compute based on the capacity that you purchase. So that would be an FSKU that ranges anywhere from an F2, which is 2 compute units per second, all the way to an F2048, which is 2048 compute units per second, and the cost increases dramatically. It's exponential, right? So
Awesome. So it's just the general purpose then, it's not the business critical.
it
Just wanted to confirm.
yes, it
That's what
is
I
the
thought.
general purpose. It's serverless. It is not the hyperscale. And so, they tried to position this product as, the center of the stack, at least whenever talking about the product, because, there's a true adoption story here. But as this slide shows, you have the different workloads that actually exist there, and some of these have actually been renamed since I created the slide. But you have the data integration, real-time intelligence, databases, analytics, and Power BI. It actually, when you're working with this product, it actually, and we'll get into that here in a second when we look at the architecture, but it stores the data ultimately in one lake. And so that really gives you the unified experience whenever you're using Fabric. So it gives you the unified architecture, the unified governance, and the unified business model. So with that said, let's go ahead and just kind of dive into the high level architecture of the product. So there is a live database, and it is very similar, not quite identical, but almost identical to an Azure SQL database. So what does this mean? This means that there's actually like your MDF files and your LDF files like there is in SQL and there is in Azure SQL. But much like Azure SQL, you don't get to see those. You don't get to choose where they get stored. You don't get to define If you were to do partitioning, you don't get to define that. It's a SaaS solution. So Microsoft does that behind the scenes for you. Now, one thing to note here, because this is using the serverless engine, um, if you've ever used serverless in Azure SQL database, you know that you need to, if it's cold, there's going to be a delay and there's probably going to be timeouts. So with a SaaS solution, Microsoft doesn't want that. So what they actually use here for the solution is called a fleet service. So what they're doing is basically they keep your databases warm and they just kind of rotate them around so that it always is ready to go whenever you need it to go, as if it weren't serverless, right? So now you might be asking yourself, what is the advantage of using this database as opposed to the one in Azure? And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that it has this thing called mirroring that is it's just there by default. And so what that mirroring does, which is also available on Azure, but you have to set that up yourself. What it does is in near real time, it performs an incremental replication, inserts, updates, deletes of your data from your transactional database over to one lake, right? And so basically it's grabbing all this data, all these records as they come in or close to when they come in, and it's going to go ahead and store them in Delta Parquet format in one lake, and then you can actually access that Delta Parquet data through the SQL Analytics endpoint, which is effectively the same endpoint and the same engine as you use for the Fabric data warehouse. And so this is really powerful because at this point, you have a database that you created in one click, and it's automatically replicating over to your warehouse environment, if you will, or your reporting replica without having to configure anything. And then your BI developers, your data analysts, and all of that, they query directly the SQL endpoint without it ever impacting your actual transactional workloads, right? But it's not just that. You actually have all this other compute engines that can access those same Delta Parquet files. So you can you can you can access those same files from Spark. You can access them from Power BI. You can access them from Warehouse directly, but you can also leverage the SQL Analytics endpoint to do cross-database queries where you can write a SQL query that is going and joining to a table in your warehouse or a table in your lakehouse. All in one within the SQL Analytics endpoint and never really impacting your actual database. Um, any questions here so far? All right, silence is good. So
I
now,
love that. You basically got mirroring for free.
yeah, you absolutely do, and mirroring, I guess, is technically free already whenever you're looking at Azure SQL database, and in quotes, and here it's kind of the same thing. So if you look at mirroring, when you enable it from Azure SQL, your capacity has to be on, which that's going to be the case here as well. And then your compute is actually free, but you're still paying for the storage. And that is going to be effectively the same thing here as well. The biggest difference though is that you don't have to worry about securing that communication because your Azure is going to be one tenant. This is going to be in a completely different tenant. So there's a security component to get your data from Azure over to Fabric or from on-prem over to Fabric, right? Where you don't want it to go over the open internet, or you may have to send it through the wire, but then you need to encrypt it and you need to just kind of continue to add all these different layers of security. So the fact that it all lives within the same tenant and it's all backed by one lake just speeds up a lot of that process at a cost. There is a cost. It is a shared platform, a shared compute across the board. So that is just kind of one of those things that they're still working on. All right, so moving on, let's just now switch gears and start talking about DevOps, which is kind of where we're going to spend the majority of our time here today. So what is Azure DevOps? If you've never used it, it is a service that Microsoft has packaged together and delivered to support the entire software development lifecycle. So it allows you to do a whole slew of things. There's going to be, um, you know, different I'm going to call them services too, but that is not the actual name for them. I just forget the word, that are available within this suite of services. And this actually helps teams deliver software more efficiently for a number of reasons. There's going to be the automation component, but there's also going to be the consistency of it, right? So DevOps actually has uh, multiple different, yeah, I'm going to continue calling them services, boards, which is going to be where you have all your project management stuff. If you want to do your Kanban boards, you want to do your sprints and all of that, then there's going to be test plans where if you're running a QA team, or a whole testing team, they can go ahead and build test plans and test runs and all of that and just kind of keep track of that. And then there's going to be artifacts, which frankly, I have never used them. There is something else called an artifact that you generate whenever you're using a pipeline for the build. That's what I have used. I know that these artifacts are great whenever you're working in the software development world for, if you're like doing microservices or if you're doing actual environments. I've never had a need for them, so I've not used them. But then you see the two here at the top, the repos and the pipelines. And I have those in a separate color box because that's all that we're really going to be focusing on today. So repos, that's where your repositories live. DevOps supports a couple of different flavors of repositories, but generally speaking, you're going to be working with Git, and that's what our demo is going to be showing. And then pipelines, it actually has I don't necessarily love the name here. It used to be called something else. It used to be called builds, and then there used to be releases. But then Microsoft went ahead and renamed builds to pipelines, but then left releases as releases as opposed to just kind of combining two of them. So it messes with my brain. I don't love the name, but that's effectively what this is. This is going to be where all of your build pipelines and your release pipelines are going to exist. So this is the actual heart of CI/CD here. So just kind of moving on to the structure of Azure DevOps. If you've never worked with Azure DevOps, it is a service, and then if you don't have one, you can go into the Azure portal and go ahead and navigate to Azure DevOps and just go ahead and create what's called an organization, and that organization is just basically going to be your one container. You can have multiple organizations in your tenant. That is perfectly valid. And some organizations do that. But generally speaking, when it comes to particularly small, medium-sized businesses, one org is all that they end up using. But then inside of that org, you're going to have what's called projects. And this is actually a key differentiator between Azure DevOps and GitHub. GitHub, you have organizations and then you have repos. Here in DevOps, you actually have projects as just kind of a middle container to then contain your repos and your pipelines and so on. So again, you can have within the organization, you can have one or many projects. And then inside of each project, you may have one or many repositories. And then if you notice here, you may have a repo that does not have any sort of pipelines associated with them. You may have a monolithic repo that has a lot of different pipelines that are associated with it. If you happen to organize your development that way, or you may have just kind of a, I don't want to call it microservice, but I'd rather think of it as a linear, vertical, where you have, hey, this database gets deployed by this particular pipeline. You know, this application gets deployed by this particular pipeline, and they may or may not actually share the repo. So let's now chat a little bit about the Fabric to ADO integration. And the kind of cool thing about this particular talk is that without really realizing it, I'm exposing three different platforms to you, right? It's going to be Azure, it's going to be Azure DevOps, and it's going to be Fabric, right? So because these are two completely different tenants here. We need to integrate them. We need to get them to talk to one another, right? So you can see here on the slide on the left-hand side, I have what's called the Fabric tenant. And inside of the Fabric tenant, I'm going to have a workspace. And in this case, it's very, very simple. So I just have one database in this workspace, right? Then over on this side, I have Azure DevOps. And inside of DevOps, I'm going to have my Git repository. So I need to actually configure Git integration, is what it's called, from within the workspace in the Fabric tenant, which is actually going to require Entra authentication so that I'm able to connect the two systems together. Now this allows you to set a working branch, that's going to be kind of the branch that you're going to be committing to. And once you do this action, it's actually going to perform an initial sync between the two systems. So what does that mean? Because it happens to be at the workspace level, if you have more than just a database, then all of those other items are going to end up in your repository, first of all. But we're gonna ignore that for the purposes of this talk. And then, but if you within your database, if you happen to already have tables and views and store procedures and so on, this initial sync, it's actually going to get the schema or the definition of all of those into your repository, right? So we're talking schema here, we're not talking data. And that's kind of cool. That's kind of powerful. It's kind of doing the initial commit for you, which is interesting. Now, one note here that is that if the repository has other items in the folder, it will override the workspace. So that's something that you just kind of need to be aware of. Now, this also kind of goes in the opposite way when it comes to deployments, right? Whenever you, so if you really think about the whole application lifecycle management, you started in Fabric in the database, you made some changes, then you went over to DevOps to do the build, and that can happen locally. It's just a connection string to the database, so no big deal. But then whenever it comes to deployment time, you actually need to set up something. You need to plumb these two systems together. And so what that means is that you need to actually create a service connection in Azure DevOps. And all that is a service principal, right? That is then going to have permissions over on your Fabric environment and in your workspace, to be able to deploy things. Now, it's happened to me multiple times, even during demos, and I know it happens to a lot of people that are just either relatively new to DevOps or just not thinking about it right on the spot, where it's like, hey, okay, I already did all my plumbing, but it's not working, and it's because we forgot to grant permissions on the workspace to the service principal. So from this illustration, you can see here just kind of how the overall process would work with Fabric, which is you have your dev workspace, and then you're going to be integrating that one into your repo. Once you've committed, you've done your pull request and all of that, it's actually going to, you're going to trigger the CI/CD process, and then you would basically grab that and deploy over to, in this case, your test workspace. And then one thing about this particular model is that I'm not, at no point am I using the deployment pipelines in Fabric, because the deployment pipelines in Fabric, what they do is they actually deploy the workspace from one to the other. And, there could be changes that get made here in this workspace, right? If you don't have it completely locked. So what I actually like to do with this model is I always just, my source of truth is going to be that DACPack file. So I deploy that over to each one of the environments. So it deploys to test, and then it deploys to prod separately. Any questions so far? If not, let's go ahead and,
I will keep on asking questions that keep you on your toes.
yep.
How about post-deployment scripts?
Post-deployment scripts, that's a great question. It depends on what you're trying to do. I can tell you, if you're hinting at T-SQL-T unit testing, CLR assemblies are actually not supported in SQL database and Fabric. And basically just about anything, if you think about it, because it's Fabric, anything that might require you to do like SQL authentication or anything like that, it's just kind of out the door as well. You do have the ability to do post-deployment scripts. You just have to code it and manage them yourself.
Okay, so that
Any,
wouldn't be part of the DAC pack. It would be something else that you would have to create.
you can manage it that way. That's what I would personally choose to do. If you wanted to just kind of leverage the SQL package to do so, there are definitely options. I When I first started doing DevOps for databases, SQL package executable was not that great. And this is also actually back in the on-prem days. So, you know, if you had like circular references or, like link servers or cross database queries, it got really hairy, right? So I kind of got into the practice of well, first of all, to circumvent a lot of that stuff, I actually started my DevOps career with databases with a different product, a Redgate product. And but then also while working through all of that and just kind of learning to manage things on my own, I just kind of it's PowerShell, right? With manage within DevOps. So as long as you can connect with PowerShell, you have the power to do that. So I usually in my deployment pipelines and even post deployment, I just like to have separate steps so that I can get all that logging centralized into my deployment pipeline and easier for me to access and just go to that one place as opposed to being all over the place. Does that make sense?
Sounds great.
Yep. All right. So let's go ahead. Here I am in Azure DevOps, and let me make sure. Can you guys see that? Okay. Do you need me to zoom in a little bit, or is that, just kind of give me some feedback here? But in case you've never actually gone into Azure DevOps before, this is the way you do it. Where is my cursor at? Um, 1 second. There it is. So this is the way you do it. You actually go over to dev.azure.com and then the name of your organization. So if you happen to have an organization, this is where it's going to land you. But if you don't, then this is actually going to direct you over to the Azure portal to where you can actually create your first organization. But as you can see here, after you have the first one, creating a new one is just as simple as clicking on this link button, and that's going to give you the wizard to create your org. So once I'm here, you can see that there's just a very basic dashboard here. And inside of this org, I have one single project, but I do have this new project button that I can come over here to click on. And then I can just kind of configure, hey, this is going to be my new project. And, if I want to add a description, I would do that. There's some advanced options here as to what version control system I may want to use and work item process, and then it's just simple as saying create, and then it would do so. I'm not going to do that because sometimes that can just throw me off of my demos, but effectively you would see another tile here which would be another project. This here is going to be the actual description that I didn't enter when I was pretending, and then down here you can see sort of those individual services there. Now when you're inside of the organization, there's going to be down here at the bottom, there's going to be this organization settings wheel. And so whenever you click into that, this is actually going to be just kind of your admin portal for your particular organization. So there are a few things that you can configure in here. I don't usually get too much into those here, but while I'm here, let me go ahead and just kind of talk about, you can see that there's going to be security, boards, pipelines, and one thing that's kind of important that I like to that I always cover here actually is going to be this concept of agent pools. If you have not worked with DevOps, or if you've never actually been over on the admin side of DevOps, DevOps works with something that's called agents. It has nothing to do with AI. This existed well before there was agentic AI or anything. It's just simply a program that runs somewhere that is going to be able to allow you to enable this automation. And you can see that there's going to be usually by default, there's going to be what's called the Azure Pipelines agent pool. And then there's going to be just kind of a default. And this is basically, you can see like even the little icon is a cloud. That's hosted by Microsoft, right? So they actually allow you to use some of their own VMs to run your builds and your deployments from there. I usually don't recommend that because I have worked and I do a lot of work with financial service organizations, and in order for this to work, it just basically means that you're saying, hey, I want to leave my database exposed to the internet. You don't want to do that, right? So I always tell everybody, to go ahead and do self-hosted, which is sort of called local agents. So you can see here, I just happen to have an agent pool that I'm calling local agents. And inside of there, if I go in there, I can show you here that I happen to have one agent. And the cool thing about this, I'm actually running this on my laptop today. right? So in an organization, an enterprise, you probably have a separate server or VM where you can have, or multiple ones, and you can have multiple agent pools or just single agent pool, but you can have multiple agents here. And so what that means, if you happen to have this pool and you have, say, 10 agents, that allows for a lot of concurrency to take place. So if you want to achieve some of that maturity level that that Dora talks about, and that you see like at the Fangs, where they just basically deploy constantly. That's sort of what happens. You need that level of concurrency. But I just think it's really awesome that you can run this locally or you can run it on the server. And then the reason I like to do that again is because my environment is logged down to my IP, so that way only I can access it, right, in this scenario. Something else that to kind of briefly mention here is going to be around repositories, and this is just at the org level. There's going to be some policies that you can actually set up for your different repos. I usually don't mess with this at the org level, but there's definitely going to be different toggles and different options that you can enable at the organization level. Now, just kind of moving back to here, let's go ahead and explore the project. So here inside of the project, you get a basic dashboard here that just kind of tells you, hey, project stats for the last 1 day, 7 days, 30 days. This is just a demo environment that I have. So obviously I haven't done any pull requests in the last 7 days. I just fired it up today. We're going to be doing a pull request later on today, and we should be able to see that update. But I did make sure that, nothing had changed out from under me. So I did test a couple of deployments and they worked. So yay me, I have 100% build success and deployment success here. But what I wanted to just kind of talk to you about here is going to be here on this left-hand side. You can see that I have this blade that just kind of has the overview up here, which has a couple of different options. Summary, which is going to be displaying this specific dashboard that we were looking at, and which actually summary just kind of lists everything in this. I'm actually on the dashboard. There's going to be a wiki here, and there's a couple of different things here. You can do a centralized wiki for the project, or you can actually do source control wikis, which allows you to start getting into documentation as code, which is something that I definitely enjoy, and I recommend people to strive for. But then we also have here the two main characters for today. Is going to be the actual repos and the pipelines. But if I go down into the project settings, you can actually see here under the different services that there are multiples, and you can actually toggle them on and off as you need. So if you create a brand new project, all of these are going to be enabled, and then you're going to see multiple different options there, which may be pertinent to you. But for the particular demo that we're going to be doing today, I just don't need all the additional noise. So I only enabled repos and pipelines, and I left everything turned off. So there's that flexibility that we have here. In addition, you may recall a couple of slides ago, I talked about you integrate Fabric into ADO in order to be able to leverage the repository. But then there's going to be the deployment component, which actually you have to set up integration between ADO and Fabric in that direction. And so I talked about service connections. So you actually create those at the project level, right? And so what that is, as I mentioned, is just a simple service principal. And the way that you create one is here in the project settings. You go down to service connections, and then you're going to say, hey, I want to create a new service connection. And you're going to be able to see here that there are multiple different types of connections that are already kind of pre-configured here for you in order to do this. Now, little secret, I'm sure that everybody knows, it's not a very well kept secret. Fabric capacities are actually managed within Azure. And so whenever I go to set up a service connection to Fabric or even to Power BI, I just simply select an Azure Resource Manager. And then once I do that, I can actually start configuring here what the service connection is going to look like. So, I can identity type, app registration, that is going to be your service principal. You can also set up and manage identity. But for Fabric, we definitely recommend just going with the service principal. And then there's a couple of different types of credentials that you can use. You can do the the workload identity federation, or you can do the secret. And what that really means is that with the federation, it's just Microsoft manages the secret rotation here for you. Whereas if you do secret, then it becomes just your classic service principal where you have to do the secret rotation yourself. If you prefer to do that, that's great. I personally don't demo this on a daily basis. I demo it like every month or every couple of months or so. So being federated works well for me. I have also worked at organizations where you don't need just one service connection, you need 100. And who has time to be constantly recycling the service principles on top of all the other ones that you need for your actual workloads? Then it gives you, a drop down that it recognizes from your tenant, because Azure DevOps also you manage it from within your Azure tenant. So it recognizes the subscription, and then you can even set up, the resource group that you're trying to hit. Give it the particular name and grant permissions to it, and then you click save. Not going to do that. It's going to go ahead and create it for you. Mine is called Fabric Demos Connection. That's about as deep as I'm going to go into this. This session is being recorded, but if I click into that, then I'm going to be exposing my service principal. And I definitely don't want to do that because I don't want to end up incurring charges from people testing with my stuff, right? So
Yeah, you don't want to do that. People tried to hack me before.
yes, exactly. So yeah, definitely, I don't want to do that. So so now let's just kind of move on over to repos. So whenever I click on repos here, you can see that and it defaulted me to this one. I have a couple of repos here that I'm going to be using for the demo today. This one that I'm calling SQLDB in Fabric, which is going to be kind of the main event. And then there's going to be this Git integration one that we're actually going to be using for a separate demo on showing you how to connect Fabric over to ADO to just kind of get those items into the repo. But before doing all of that, just because I like to keep this session as, a one-on-one level, let's just kind of look at how you create a brand new repo, right? So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. You can click here on where you see your repos. And so we navigate over to the service, it defaulted to this. There's going to be this little drop down here. And you can click on it, and then it's going to give you these different options. It's going to give you your list of repositories. I have seen organizations that have thousands of them, and you keep scrolling. So that's where the filter is actually really great, and that's where having good naming conventions really goes a long way. But then you can also see here we have very simple, very basic new repository button there. So if I go ahead and I ended up clicking on the wrong box there by accident. I apologize. If I go ahead and click new repo, this is where I say, hey, this is going to be my demo because I'm super creative, and I'm going to say yes, add a README file to this guy. But then here we see this other option, which is going to be asking me, do you want to add a .git ignore file? If you are new to Git or to version control systems altogether, what this does is it's a special file for Git that where you can store metadata around the things that you want version control to actually ignore. So if you really think about it, whenever I'm working locally on my machine and I have it configured the way I like it, and I may have additional utilities in there, the server does not need that. Nobody else here, John or anybody else, you don't need to have I don't need to force my configurations on you. So that's when this .git ignore file comes in handy. Typically, whenever it comes to most Microsoft products, I usually select the Visual Studio category here because it actually contains a lot of things in there that's just, from whether it's going to be your application projects, whether it's going to be your database projects, whether it's going to be something like an SSIS project, a reporting project, and so on. It goes ahead and includes all of that in there so that those files in your bin folder and so on get ignored and don't get committed to the repo. So typically do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and say create, and then this is going to spin up, and hey, I have a new repo now. You see that I have 3. So it's completely blank here. It's completely empty. It does have the README file that I selected, and it does have the .git ignore. And so I want to just kind of peek at that one a little bit since we talked about it a little bit. So you see where it has all the different all those different extensions here, it's going to ignore anything that's going to be a RS user, SUO user, so on solution, but it has a lot more, right? So I like to pick this one. It's fairly comprehensive. The one thing that I have noticed that this does not contain is going to be for Power BI if you're using Power BI projects. Any questions here so far? All right, so that is how you create a brand new repo in Azure DevOps. So let me go ahead and jump over to the slide, and it says that yes, I'm going to be doing that in the Fabric integration as well. So that's what I couldn't remember. I've changed the structure of this a few times. So excuse me, going back into my demo environment here, let's go ahead and jump into Fabric real quick. Excuse me. So if you've never actually been in Fabric before, and I just happen to be looking at that particular view, so let's just kind of demonstrate what that looks like. The way that you actually access Fabric is going to be you go into your URL. I need to get my cursor in place here. And it's going to be here. You're going to go to app.fabric.microsoft.com. You can also get here by typing in app.powerbi.com, if I recall. I don't think you need the .microsoft on that one, and it's going to bring you here. And so,
You
so
just get a different
right here,
experience in the Power
yeah, you
BI.
just get a different experience. Yes, exactly. And so, and that's an excellent segue as to exactly where I was headed. So here on the left-hand side, you can see that there's just kind of, there are all these different icons here. Some of them are the ones that I have open here that you can see here. These are the workspaces that I'm going to be working with because I happen to be in the Fabric environment or in the Fabric experience. But down here at the bottom, you can see that I have a Fabric icon, right? And so what I'm going to do is if I click that, it tells me, hey, there's Power BI in Fabric. So if I happen to click on Power BI, this is actually going to take me to the Power BI experience, which is where you would land if you had typed in app.powerbi.com or app.powerbi.microsoft.com. I don't recall. So just kind of going back to this particular experience. And oh, by the way, the experiences are largely similar, but not exactly identical. There are things that you can do in the Fabric experience that you cannot do in the Power BI experience. And those are going to be around, your data engineering and your machine learning and so on. So this is a demo on Fabric SQL database. So we're going to be using the Fabric experience here today. So here on the home page, you can see there's a bunch of buttons. There's a bunch of tiles. You can slide back and forth. You can see a lot of different, um, templates that just kind of are suggested here. You can create a new workspace, all of that. I consider this to be kind of noisy, but it's also excellent for getting started. If you want to learn more about, a workshop, you can click on this guy. If you want to ingest data into that, these are tutorials that you can do or use. And then down here, you have just some sort of quick access. So this is basically showing me all the different workspaces that I have in this particular tenant and that I have used recently. Then it can also show me the different items. Items are going to be the things, the artifacts that exist within inside of those workspaces. And then I also have the ability to just kind of filter it down to some favorites here. I don't have any favorites selected, so that's going to show up empty. Now here on this left-hand side, we can see, and I'm zooming in a little bit more, there's going to be this workspaces button. So if I happen to click it, another blade pops up here on the side and it's going to show me a list of all my different workspaces. And those are going to be the workspaces that I myself as a user have access to. There can be 1,000 workspaces in your organization, but you've only been assigned rights to one, and that's all that's going to show up here. Then we can see a Copilot button that's going to bring you to the Fabric Copilot experience. And then you see this colorful ones down here. Those just happen to be the different workspaces that I have opened in this tenant today, preparing for this presentation here today. So you can see here that they are actually numbered in the order in which I opened them. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I went to this Git integration demo workspace, Dev SQL Saturday, Test SQL Saturday, Prod SQL Saturday, in that order. And then there are these different colors. And so that's kind of neat because then up here, this is also something that's relatively new to Fabric. It got announced during FabCon in Vienna, so that was in September. This is just kind of a new preview where it actually keeps all of your different things that you open. It generates these little friendly tabs up here so that it's actually easier without having to navigate multiple clicks to get from one place to the other. It just kind of keeps them open here for you, which is nice. They are number coordinated and they are color coordinated so that so that you're able to just kind of track them that way. So now going here and talking, let's actually access it from here. I talked about, we are going to be doing a Git integration for Fabric. So let's go ahead and go into this workspace that I saw aptly named Git integration demo. A couple of things that you're going to notice here. You're going to notice here that there's this little diamond up here. That means that this is a premium workspace or a Fabric workspace, which is what you need. You need a Fabric workspace to work with Fabric. Now there's also this little gibberish icon here. This is just indicative of this particular workspace being assigned to a license for a Fabric trial. You may have noticed up here that I actually do have a trial activated on this tenant right now, and there are 10 days left on it. And so whenever you first open this, it gives you a nice warning that your trial is about to expire, so you should consider paying for Fabric, right? For the purposes of this very simple Git integration demo, the trial works just fine. So that's the one that I have assigned here, but for the other ones, I actually am using a paid capacity. So now over here on the top right-hand side in the workspace, there's a couple of other options that we see here. One of which was very important is going to be this one right here that's called workspace settings. Of course, I clicked the wrong button there. And so this is where you actually go on and look at all the different workspace settings. We're going to be touching base on this one here in a second. But then you also have here the manage access, and I clicked on the wrong button there again. You can see that I haven't used Zoom it in a couple of days. So what I wanted to do was just, hey, let's leave it at that. I wanted to do the arrow. But what you can do here is you can actually manage access. So this is where you say, hey, I want to add individuals. So this is going to be Entra ID users, or it could be also service principals, right? So, and then there's 4 different roles that are available here in Fabric by default, and the only ones that you can have: admin, member, contributor, and viewer. Each one of them, this one is more powerful than this one is more powerful than this one, and then lastly, the viewer, which is just going to be read-only. I don't cover that too much in here. If you need to learn more about it, there's plenty of documentation out there. Now let's go ahead and go into the workspace settings here. And here we have several different things. So license info is something that I briefly touch on. This is where I can actually go and say and edit. You can see here that I'm currently under a trial license. So that means that my workspace is assigned to that particular trial that I have currently. I can go in here and edit it to say, hey, it's going to be a pro workspace, a premium per user, or a paid Fabric capacity, and then actually select the license capacity that I want to use. But let's just kind of move on to the Git integration portion. So super simple. Just go here to the Git integration tab. I am currently logged in, so you see this, but if I were logged out, it would actually just kind of have a login button here saying, hey, do you want to log in? That's my bad. I should have logged out before I started the demo. I didn't, so we're going to move on from that. So once I log in, it recognizes my, my Entra tenant, and it says, hey, you're associated with this particular organization in DevOps, which is going to be this Pereira Data Solutions. And then I can say, hey, because I'm trying to integrate into DevOps, this is the org that I want to work with. This is the project that I want to work with. And then I get to select the actual repo that I want to work with. And then it allows me to select a branch here. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to integrate this with my main branch over there. And so then I go here and say connect and sync, and then it establishes the connection because it's using my credentials, my Entra ID credentials, and it's going ahead and connecting to Git. And then you can see in here I have a couple of different objects, a SQL database, as well as the analytics endpoint that comes with the SQL database, and they are currently syncing. So we can also see here that because now it is a get integrated a workspace, I have this source control button here that I can click on, and this is where I would go in to manage any of my source control things. So if I wanted to view the repository from here, and just because I didn't know how to get to it, I can click on the ellipsis, click on this button, and it's actually going to take me over to Azure DevOps again. And it is going to open up and it's going to show me, check it out. I actually just now created this folder that is my SQL database. It happens to be a completely empty database, so there's no payload in here. So if I go back over to this side, it's still kind of spinning, right? Sometimes it takes clicking the refresh button, and it tells you, okay, you're fully synced, and there's, you're matching on both sides. So it's that simple, you guys. That is what it takes to be able to integrate these two systems in order to source control things. So now just going back to the slides here. And I promise you we only have like a couple more slides. Check it out. My next slide is just let's go back into a demo. So probably should have remembered that. But okay. So now we're going to be looking at how we create, build, and release pipelines in Azure DevOps. So let me go ahead and go over to this window over here and take a look at that. So here on the pipelines service, you can see that I have something called pipelines with this nice little icon here, right? And so that is a build. I also have environments, I have releases, I have a library where is where you can actually store variables, and you can create something called a variable group, which is going to be a group of variables. So you can, as you may imagine, with a variable, you get to reuse those things if you need to. So if you think on the all the old on-prem days, there might be a server that has 100 databases. You don't really want to keep track of all of those individually. So you can just kind of create yourself a variable saying, hey, this is going to be my dev server name. And so as you're creating any one of these builds or any one of these releases, you just kind of reference that variable and it knows it. So whenever the time comes to migrate to a new server or so on, you don't have to go and update 100 different things. You just simply go and update the value of the variable and you're good to go. And then there's also something here called task groups, similar to a variable group. It's just a grouping of tasks to just kind of templatize things and allow you to just kind of reuse things. Now in here, I'm defaulted to pipelines. That's going to be the builds. And you see that I have one that's already created called build SQLDB for Fabric. If you wanted to create a new one, you would just click on this button here to say create a new pipeline, and then you see this kind of a wizard experience that just allows you to just kind of step through it. So you can create a YAML-based pipeline for Azure Git repos Git. That is the current recommendation by Microsoft. I'm actually not following that recommendation for the purposes of these demos because I find a lot of value on using the classic editor, which allows me to do the GUI thing, the visual thing, because I actually believe, and I have gotten plenty of feedback on this as well, that it allows you to get more intimate with DevOps and understand and see the things that are happening here. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go into the classic editor, and then this is still going to give me, it's still very much a wizard. So it's the first thing that it's asking me is select the source. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to be working with an Azure repo that happens to be a Git-based Azure repo, but I have multiple different other types of repos that I can be using here. So for this particular, and I'm not going to fully bake this, there's going to be like a cooking show where I'm going to show you the steps and I'm going to go to the finished product. In the interest of time, which is this actually running a bit long here for a second, so apologize on that. So you just kind of go click continue, and then it's still going to try to encourage you to use YAML, or you can use some of these templates that exist already for different types of workloads. There's not one for databases. We're professionals, so we just kind of go with empty job, and we have a blank canvas and good to go here. So a few things that I'd like to point out here is going to be immediately you see kind of the structure where it has the pipeline, and then it has here the get sources, and then you see this agent job. Here at the pipeline level, you can see that it's calling out the agent pool and it defaults to Azure pipelines. I talked earlier about, you can use the hosted or you can use private ones. I usually just say, hey, go use a private one. Mine happens to be called local agents on my computer. And so that's what I set this up. So that's going to tell the service, hey, whenever I go to run anything, it's going to run on your computer. So if I go down here to agent job one, which you can have multiple agent jobs inside of each pipeline, you can actually say, hey, inherit the agent pool from the pipeline itself, or you can actually go in and separate them here to where you can say, hey, this particular agent job is going to be running on this pipe on this pool, and this other one's going to be running in a separate pool for just for flexibility. Now, each one of those jobs needs to get configured. So you would click on this little plus button here, and then it comes up on the side where it says adding tasks. And this is where you just kind of start selecting some of the tasks that you may need. So if I start typing in SQL, for instance, you will see that there's going to be a refined version of different tasks that I can use for SQL. So whichever ones of this that you might actually need, it's as simple as just basically you drag and drop, actually, or click the add button, and then you see it kind of tells you, hey, there's going to be some settings that need attention, and then it's also going to be very not quite clicky draggy droppy like Fabric is, but very much so that, hey, you get to just kind of select what you want to be connecting to, the type of authentication that you want to be using, and so on, and you can just continue adding one step after the next and building the build pipeline that you actually need for your project. So now we just kind of revert out of here, and let's take a look at the one that it's already created for the purposes of this task today, which is building SQL Fabric SQL database. Right. So things to note here. You will see there are 4 different steps that I'm using here, and I really only need 2, but I expand to 4 for a reason. I like to have these copy files where I'm actually copying the DAC file and the DAC file only to this thing called the artifact staging directory, because there's no reason for me to be copying all that additional payload over to my releases. And then I do the publishing of the DAC artifact separately, right? So, but the 2 that I absolutely do need, and it's not super intuitive whenever it comes to Azure SQL Database or Fabric SQL Database, is going to be this .NET Core task. And you'll see here that there's actually a couple of different ones here. So there's this use.NET Core, and then there's this .NET Core. And so the difference between these 2 happens to be that the use.NET Core is just kind of for setting up the environment. So the name that I actually gave here, this particular task, I gave it the display name of installing the .NET Core SDK. The packages to install, you get to select, the runtime or the SDK. I only needed the SDK. One thing to note for Fabric SQL database is that you must be running 8.0 or greater. So I'm just saying, give me 8.x. And then every time that this pipeline runs, it goes ahead and it's going to go get the latest 8 point something version that exists and installing it into the agent. Then moving on to this next step, which is going to be the actual build task. Again, I gave it a name called build pack that you choose that, but as you start configuring it, you tell it what resource manager connection to use. This is the service connection from DevOps that I showed you guys. And then there's a few different commands that are available for this particular task. This task is not specific for building databases. It works for a whole lot of different things. It can be used for publishing. It can be used for packing. It can be used for NuGet pushes. It can be used for building Visual Studio solutions or SSIS solutions or database projects. So it's very flexible. So the main thing that you have to do though is that you actually have to tell it where either the solution file or the project file exists. So you will see here that I actually have this specific syntax, which is actually a variable here in DevOps, very similar to PowerShell variables. And then I'm just saying, go and find SQL project name, and we'll show you the value here in a second, .SQL proj. I could have just simply said ** SQL proj, but that just felt like cheating a little too much. So I'm just using the wildcard for traversing the hierarchy. And if I go here to my variables, you see I have variable groups. I don't have any of them linked to this, but I have pipeline variables, and you see here my SQL project name variable, the value of it is AdventureWorks. So what that task is actually going to be doing is going to be navigating the repo, and it's going to be finding a file called adventureworks.sqlproj, and it's going to build it, and then it's going to generate a DACPack file, um, which happens to be named exactly the same thing as the project, with the extension .dacpack. That's going to be the difference. And so that's what I grab in this particular task. And then I say, okay, I want to copy it over to the artifact staging directory. And lastly, I want to publish that as an artifact of this particular build pipeline. So whenever I run that, and let's go ahead and show you the execution of one here. This is effectively what happens. This is an execution from earlier today when I was just doing a quick test. And so it's that's very simple. It's not really giving me the, oh, that's because I'm at that step. Okay, so these are the different steps that ran. So it goes ahead and does the checkout from the repo. Then it's going into the tasks that I actually define myself. It
This is
always has
all
to check
running
out.
on that agent. So
Yes,
that
this is,
VM that you deployed, that's where this is the output from. Anyways, go ahead, Kevin. I just wanted to add a little
yeah.
colorful commentary.
Yeah, no, great. That's great. And actually, because I'm running this on the agent here locally, you can see when I ran it earlier today, my agent is still running. You can see here where my computer went to sleep, and then I woke it up again, it reconnected. So if I were to trigger a new one right now, that agent would actually show you a new job running. So yes, so this is the output from that. So first step, install the .NET Core. It has the latest one, so I didn't do much. It only took 1 second. The next step is it goes up there and it goes and finds the actual SQL project file, and I'm struggling with my mouse here, but it goes and finds it over here in this agent directory, which is a temporal directory, and it runs what it needs to run, and then it generates the DACPack. And then once it's able to successfully pay that, it's saying, hey, the build succeeded. I happen to have a warning. I'm not that worried about this warning, so I just ignore it. Then I have on this next step that is actually going and saying, hey, I want to copy just that DACPack file from this bin debug directory just over to this A, which happens to be the artifact directory in DevOps. And I'm just going to go ahead and publish that as an artifact that can then be consumed by my release. So just kind of moving on to releases and trying to go fairly quickly here. If you wanted to create, so you can see here, I have a couple of different releases, and this is an actual different experience from the other one. They used to be more similar, but about 6 years ago, pipelines changed, releases didn't. So this is kind of what that looks like. You can see, there's a way to organize them into folders if you wanted to do that. I have not done that. But if I wanted to create a new release pipeline, all I have to do is click on the blue button. And so actually, never mind, that's creating a new release of this pipeline. If I wanted to create a new release pipeline, I go click over here on this new plus new, and then I say new release pipeline, and then it takes me through a similar enough wizard experience. So it's telling me I can use a template, or I can start from an empty job. I always start from an empty job. And then you can see here, this is a little bit more graphical. So we have a couple of different containers here, if you will. One for the artifacts, where I can actually go and add an artifact. And so I'll go ahead and just kind of demonstrate that here. So I happen to know that I created the DACPack, and then I published it as an artifact from my build. And so what I'm trying to do is release that. So I'm going to select a build artifact. And so it's gonna go ahead and kind of pre-populate my project, because I only have one, but if you had multiples, you could select that. And then here the source is going to be a build pipeline. I only have one, super simple. And then I can go in here and just, there's a couple of different things to note over here. So it's going to be the default version and the source alias. The source alias does not matter too much, but it matters. And then the biggest thing here is going to be the default version. So you have multiple different options here. I always like to say the latest from a specific branch with tags. I don't really care that much about the tags because I believe in doing trunk-based development. But the one thing that I always want to make sure of is that the only thing that is actually being released is going to be my main branch. So what does that mean? I don't want John's branch to go to production without actually going through a full, code review process, right? Where you do the pull request and all of that. So once you do that, you can go ahead and set that up. You see that the artifact shows up here, and then you see this little lightning button here. This is going to be the continuous deployment trigger, right? So the CI/CD, continuous deployment. If you don't have this enabled, it means that you're doing this manually, so you're not actually doing CI/CD. You would only be doing CI. And once I finish showing you this, I'm going to go back because I forgot to show you guys where you configure the CI portion of it. So I apologize.
No worries.
But then,
And you
but
can
then
also put, gatekeepers too, which is the best thing of ADF.
yes,
I'm an Azure DevOps. Sorry, go ahead.
yes, you can definitely do gatekeeping here as well. You can do it in a uh, pre-deployment condition where you set up gates, or you can also set up pre-deployment approvals where you want a human to actually be doing the deployment, and you can also configure, what triggers it. Is it going to be after a release? Is it going to be manual only? And there's multiple different options here to help you kind of manage that. You also see on this side that there's going to be post deployment, and you can do the same thing, post deployment approvals or gates. I have found in my experience over many years that I don't really care that much for pre-deployment conditions. I care more about post-deployment conditions when I'm deploying to multiple things. So what I usually like to do for this demo is I work in dev, and then what needs to go to QA is just going to go to QA. I don't set up anything here, so it just goes. But then I have a post-deployment approval where I actually assign an approver and say, hey, this approver needs to do that. And I get a couple of different options here that are kind of key in a well-run environment. The user requesting the release or deployment should not approve it. Makes a lot of sense, right? Developers always think their code is great, so they are going to approve themselves. There needs to be checks and balances. But the other thing, actually, I'm saying that completely backwards. I don't care for post-deployment. I care for pre-deployment. And one of the reasons for that is because there's this nice little option here of, where is that? Deployment queue settings. You can say deploy all of them in a sequence or deploy the latest and cancel other. So usually, I like to select this one, deploying the latest and canceling the others, because you're version controlling into this and you're deploying into the trunk, into main. And so each one of them is going to contain the previous one. So I have seen in multiple places where, like things get backed up and queued up, and you have to just kind of waste a lot of time in processing power going one at a time. Because it's additive, I just say, no, just go ahead and deploy the latest and cancel all the other ones. Work well for me may not necessarily work for you and your organization. And the other reason that I prefer the pre-deployment, not the post-deployment, I want to make sure that I get that right because I said it backwards, is because when you have a post-deployment approval, you may approve or think that your deployment is going to happen, but there's another one that has not been post-approved. And so you're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and nothing is happening because it's just in a queued state until that action gets
Yeah, I
completed.
was wondering why you said you like post-deployment, but I didn't say
Yes, no,
anything.
no, pre-deployment. I said that backwards.
Hey,
So
another quick question before you move off of this. This
uh,
is all through the GUI. Do you like YAML, or a lot of people, all the DevOps guys love YAML?
yes, YAML is definitely very powerful. I use it. I use the GUI a lot as well. Depending on what client I'm working with. At my previous job, we were heavily invested into the GUI, so we did that. But YAML is definitely the recommendation officially now. It's fairly universal. If you happen to work with GitHub and you're doing actions that's all going to be YAML based, you should
Exactly.
definitely be doing YAML. I just find that whenever I'm going through a demo and I'm not trying to do it at the speed of light, it allows for new users to actually see all the different steps that are involved as opposed to just seeing text, right?
YAML's difficult.
Yes,
Very
yes.
true.
So just kind of taking a step back and going here to my existing pipeline, I failed to show you guys this because I was speeding up. there's going to be this triggers tab here. And then there's going to be this little checkbox here that is going to be enable continuous integration. That is the checkbox that you want to check for your release to trigger automatically whenever your build completes. Without it, you don't have continuous integration. You just have another process that you have to, that's automated, but it's manual at the same time. So it gives you the consistency, just not the speed. Okay, so just kind of going back again, like a cooking show, I just kind of show you some of the things, but let's go ahead and jump into the one that's already created here. This is going to be my SQL, my deploy Fabric SQL database release pipeline. And so you see here that I have my artifact from my particular build. And I'm saying, yes, let's go ahead and in this case, weirdly enough, I'm saying latest instead of latest from the latest, from the specific branch. So I should probably correct that, but I don't want the demo gods to bite me right now, so I'm not going to touch it. You see here that I'm saying this is going to run after the release, not after a stage. If I happen to go to this prod stage, you're going to see that it actually triggers after a stage. And so that's basically what does the chaining here that you see. But outside of that, for QA, I don't have any gates. I don't have anything there. And this is super simple, you guys. It's going to be running from my local agent because that happens to be what has permissions into my environment. And then it's just one simple task. And if you look here, it is an Azure SQL database deployment task. Now, remember, it's the same engine, so it works the same way when it comes to this ish. Here's a caveat. The authentication type. With Azure SQL, you can select other options like Active Directory integrated or even SQL Server authentication. With Fabric, you do the service principal. You can do Active Directory integrated, that's Entra ID, but in an automation setting, you definitely want to be using the service principal. SQL Server authentication is not supported, and this is usually what gets defaulted to it. So this is really simple here. So I'm connecting to, the connection type is going to be Azure Resource Manager, Azure Classic. I don't even know why they show it anymore. That thing went away like 12 years ago. Then I'm saying I'm going to be connecting to that service connection that I created. And then I'm saying, okay, so use my service principal from the service connection. Is just that simple. And then I'm saying here, okay, I want to connect to my server name variable and my database name variable. So I'll show you those values here in a second. But here's kind of the meat of it, the deployment type. I want to do a SQL DACPAC file, right? So that's the artifact that I'm consuming in here. And then I'm giving it a parameterized path to be able to find that DACPAC file. And then for this particular demo, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily like this. I don't mind it. I think in a well-run, mature organization, this does not bite you. And in over 8 years on my last employer, it never once did. Drop objects not in source equals to true. I believe that your main branch, your master branch, is just kind of your gold copy, and it should be reflective of that. Some DBAs don't really enjoy that because they like tinkering and going and adding indexes in production. And whenever you have this particular option enabled, the next deployment happens, that index that they added in production only gets dropped, and then things go back to whatever issue there was. If your organization happens to work that way, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to have this parameter here. I have always just recommended, if it makes sense for your organization, go ahead and add that index in dev, check it into source control. That way it's always there every time. And then, it's sort of future proof, because if you start working these days with AI agents and things like MCP servers, it's aware of those things. So your main branch is reflective of what actually is in production today. Now going on to these variables here, you'll see that I have the variables database name, and they show up twice, as well as the server name, but not the database project name. And I have them configured here. So the reason they show up twice is because I have them scoped to individual stages. So those are the two boxes that you saw a second ago. So that allows me to basically reuse the stages. So if I go back over to this view here, what I did is I configured this one, and then I just said clone it. And then I called it prod, and that's it. That was the end of that. I created all of that there, right? So, and what allows me to do that is the fact that I have my variable values defined in scope to those specific stages. So you see it automatically detected that I added a new one. So it's saying, hey, copy of test. I'm actually not going to be saving that. So we're going to ignore this for now. But one thing that I want you to guys to pay attention to here is going to be this database name. Even though in the GUI here in Fabric, it actually is called, it's going to show me AdventureWorks and nothing else. In reality, on the back end, it's going to be AdventureWorks and some GUID. That's because of that Flit service that we were talking about. It's serverless, so the way that Microsoft is able to manage that, it just has a bunch of databases that are rotating, and they happen to be GUIDs. And then whenever you select one, you name it, and it appends that to the name, and that's gonna
Did
be
you
it for
get that
eternity.
from the connection properties of the SQL Analytic endpoint?
Yes, yes, you can, and you also can get them from the connection properties of the database itself. Yes, and so and then also you can see here this is going to be the server name, which again it's created programmatically by Microsoft. It says nobody's ever going to remember this, so I don't want to either. That's why I like to use variables here. So just kind of going back to what John mentioned here a second ago. So here we go, and I went into the database itself instead of just the workspace. So let me back up a second. If I go here, I can click on this ellipsis and I can go to settings and I can pull up the connection string. And then you can see here, it's not super friendly the way it is, but this is where I pull those values from. I got the data source is going to be my server name all the way to the semicolon. And you see the initial catalog, it contains that nice friendly GUID there. Um, so that's basically it from the perspective of creating a release pipeline. You can see here I'm looking at the executions of the pipelines over the last so many days. I ran it earlier, but let's just kind of continue moving on through the demos and ignore the slides from this point on. Here I am in Fabric again. I have 3 workspaces that I'm going to be working with: Dev, Test, Prod, and I'm actually only going to be working in Dev. So once I go here into Dev, you can see that it's already Git integrated. So whenever I go here, just to kind of show you guys, it is on a Fabric capacity. It is a paid capacity. And then I already have Git integration enabled. So this is going to be connecting over to my SQLDB in Fabric repo over there. So what I want to do here is I'm going to go into my database. So once I click into that, you'll see it's going to go into my little tab here. And so this is just, I call this like almost like SSMS Lite. This is going to be the experience that you get here on the web browser. It allows you to do things, you can see still uh, based on your different schemas, you can see the tables and views and so on. You can see that I've used this one for a couple of different places. So, and usually what I like to do is I just like to run this um, script here. So I'm going to be creating a new schema today. It's going to be Rhode Island user group. And then I'm going to be creating this Texas customers view over AdventureWorks inside of that particular schema. Um, Nothing special about this view. It just happens to be scoped to Texas. I live in Texas, so we Texans like Texas. So I'm going to go ahead and run that for the time being. So what's going to happen is that, and again, because it's serverless, it's actually going to take a little bit longer than you would expect to do this because I haven't been interacting with this database, but it's going to go ahead and create them 11 seconds, right? And so now you see here that I have a new schema, and inside of that schema, I'm going to have a new view that shows up there. Very similar to what you would do in Management Studio, Visual Studio Code. You can actually do the same things inside of those tools. You can go here and say open in and select one of those, and it will actually open your database in the tool of your choice, and you can do your development from there if you would like. I usually stick to the browser for this particular demo because I'm trying to reach business user type level users. So I like to stick with the tools that they would actually have, which is a web browser. So now that I've made that change, I can actually go and I think I did it again. I did not follow the my own recommendations here. So I'm going to go back into my workspace And I'm going to notice here that I made the change, but I made the change into, well, I made it before I created a branch. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's go here to the Git integration. I want to actually, let's just say, switch to the main branch. I understand that the workspace items may be deleted. So what that would do is if I had anything in my repo here, or rather if I had like a pipeline or a notebook or anything else into my workspace that does not exist inside of my repo here, it would drop it, right? So whenever I go here to my repo, all that I have here is going to be my SQL database. That's all I had there. So that's a safe change. So, but it's still actually giving me this nice little warning here. But yes, I want to go ahead and switch branches. I apologize. I should have done that first. I didn't because I'm rushing. So the unfortunate side effect to that is that sometimes it's a little bit slow. So you're seeing here is giving me the different notifications that is trying to sync the content and so on. So, I get impatient and I start just kind of clicking refresh multiple times until I see that it's no longer spinning. Any questions so far while that's happening?
Nope.
All right, silence is golden. So this is still spinning, but it's telling me that. So the one thing that I intended to do, typically you would have your main branch locked down, so I wouldn't even allow you to do this. I don't have it for this particular demo, but you would click on this little button here on the right hand side, this one right here, and that brings you over to the branch management. So I can actually, okay, yeah, failed to switch branches, whatever. I don't really care that much. It allows you to do a couple of different things: branch out to a new workspace, which I'm not gonna get into, or check out a new branch, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new branch here, and I'm gonna call it demo because I am not daemon, demo. I do that a lot, unfortunately. And so what that did is it went ahead and actually created a new branch in my repo. So if I go here over to branches, you'll see that there's this demo branch, which November 8th, probably should have used a different name. Let me refresh this. Yeah, let's choose a different name. Let's go ahead and repeat that step. I hate that this is on the recording, but it is what it is. I want to check out a new branch. Let's say RIEG, UG rather, sorry. And so I've successfully checked out a new branch, right? So let me go ahead and just click that refresh here. And so you can also see while we're doing that this just kind of lit up saying, hey, there's something new. And it happens to be the database. That's about as far as it goes into the level of detail. It's not able to tell me, hey, it's this particular object in the database that has changed. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go back here and sort of confirm, if not move on because I know it's there. Okay, yes. So you can see the new branch that was created. Actually, it was, oh, I see what it's saying. Main was authored in November 8th. I just saw that date and it confused me. So I decided to change to a different branch. But that's what this is. So if I go into here and I actually take a look at it, you can see that it has a structure similar to what we saw there. And then, inside of there, you can see that there are going to be functions, stored procedures, and so on. But the one thing that you notice that's missing here is I don't have that new schema that I created. So that's because I have not committed it yet. So I go in here and say, hey, I create a new view and schema, and I'm just kind of going to leave it at that. I recommend that you actually do more explicit messages than that. But for the time being, for this demo, that's good enough for me. And so this is effectively going to be checking that in. And so this product is really nice in the fact that it goes ahead and creates a SQL project, if you notice here, for me that I can leverage. And so you can also see that, hey, I now have my schema inside of there. All I have is one view, and I have my view, and then I can actually see the definition of that view. So that's great. So from a Fabric standpoint, I am basically done with this at this point. I made my changes. I am good to go. So now it's time to come over here to Azure DevOps. And so if I just kind of go back to, let's go to branches here. You will see here that it's saying, hey, you updated your branch just now. Do you want to create a pull request? And yes, I do. So because I added that commit message, it's just kind of defaulting to that. If there were multiples, you would actually see a few bullet points in here, and then you can actually add more meaningful uh, English in here, but I'm not going to do it right now. I'm totally following bad practices when it comes to my demo. Great. But I'm going to go ahead and create the pull request. So you see that because I don't have branch policies configured in this particular repo, it's not automatically assigning anybody. I'm the only person in this tenant, so I'm actually going to be the one reviewing it. So I'm going to go ahead and assign myself manually. I don't really need to because I could have just clicked the approve button. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this. And so let's see what happened, what changes were made. And so you can see that I added one schema, then I added one view. So I'm going to say, okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and approve that guy. So it's approved. And then I get options to complete the pull request, abandon it, or marking it as draft. So once you do the complete, this is actually where it's going to trigger the merge into the main branch, right? So there's a couple of different commit types that you can use here. You can read more about them if you're reading about Git. I generally recommend squash commit, particularly for new users, because this grabs all of those different commit messages that you have and condenses them into one. So whenever you're looking at your actual repo history, it just gives you that one comment. And then you can actually click into that and then go into the details. So it just kind of cleans up things. So I'm going to go ahead and complete this, and then you see it's telling me to delete the source branch, but it's actually doing it automatically. That presents a bit of a challenge here with Fabric because that means that this branch no longer exists. So if I were to hit refresh on this particular workspace, then it's going to complain that I'm connected to a branch that doesn't exist, just like it did when we started this action. Uh, that's okay. That I showed you the way to recover from that accidentally. So just kind of moving on here, we made the change. We did the pull request, and so and it got merged. So if I go here over to my pipelines, we'll see that my build is already running. That happens because of the continuous integration checkbox that we checked inside of the pipeline. This is the releases. Let me go here into the pipeline and look at the definition real quick. I guess I could have done it from there. This little checkbox right there, if that's enabled, that basically, this is the configuration saying right here, saying once you merge into the main branch, or used to be called the master branch, then it's going to trigger this build, right? So once when I go here and take a look at it, we see that it's running. It's been running for 1 minute and 13 seconds. It's a bit slower than I expected. And you can also see here my agent is saying we're running this particular job. If we take a look at what it's doing, so it checked out, it took 10 seconds, then it took 16 seconds to install the .NET Core, and actually saying, hey, the version that we found is the latest one, so it didn't do anything. It just took a while, probably network issues. And then we can see here that I went ahead and created my DAC pack. So here it's saying, that it generated it, and then I'm going to be copying it into my artifact staging directory, and then it's going to be publishing it. That's great. That's excellent. So if I go back here to this, I suddenly see that there's a new releases tab that shows up. But before I do that, I want to show you guys, so you can see here that you have the branch from the repo, as well as the commit itself that's being referenced here. So if you ever want to do the traceability, you can do that by clicking in either one of those. But the main thing that I wanted to show you guys here is that under the related here, you can see these are going to be the artifacts. There was one published. And so I happen to name it explicitly SQL DACPack. And then inside of there, there's going to be this DACPack file, right? So going back here, you can see that there's this releases tab, and you can see that I actually have my release to test already running automatically. That is because whenever I defined my release pipeline, I enabled that little trigger here, the continuous deployment trigger, right? So because I don't have any pre-deployment conditions, it's going ahead and running. So if we go back here and take a look at what it's doing, we should be seeing the output from the agent. Once again, it's running on this agent. So if I go here, you'll see that hey, the previous job completed successfully, so now I'm going to be running the job called deploy database. And we saw a second ago that it just succeeded. So when I go back here, you will see that it says succeeded. And let's just go ahead and actually, before I take a look through the logs, let me go ahead and approve. You see that I actually have an approval step here. Typically, this will be like your manager, your product owner, or whoever it might be, not you, and just say approved and just click the approve button so that it can start releasing while we're taking a look at what it did over here. So again, it's going to initialize the job. That's just normal things that happen whenever you're running ADO. Happens all the time, as well as downloading the artifact. You see here that it just found one file and it's very small. I have seen very large databases with a whole bunch of objects where you're moving megabytes of items that you really don't need. So that's why I like to do that step that I did. But if I go in here and I'm going to zoom in, so this is going to be the actual output of the task that's doing the deployment. And you can see that it initialized the deployment. It's throwing a couple of different warnings here that is just specific to the version of DACPAC that's happening. I'm not too worried about that. But effectively, it goes and connects to the database. It generates the delta, and it's saying, hey, the only thing that I found that's different is going to be this view and the schema right here. So it goes ahead and it issues those statements into the actual script that's going to be run to generate those two artifacts there. And so once it generates them, it goes ahead and says completed, I'm moving on. So let's go ahead and go into my database here in the test workspace and take a look at that. All right, so here we can see that I do have my new schema in my new view.
Awesome.
No, I'm not pulling any tricks on you guys. They were not already created. I promise you they didn't exist. I usually go ahead and show you guys that they don't exist in production before I click the approve button, but I got ahead of myself a second ago saying, hey, let's
That's
kind of try
fine.
and
We're
save some
running
time, but
late on
you can,
time anyways.
yes, exactly. And so I went ahead and did that. So you can see here that there's my view. My test and prod databases are actually empty in these two workspaces because I don't really need data there. I only have data in
And that's a
dev.
good
Just
point. CI/CD doesn't bring over data.
exactly. Thank you. You completed my sentence there. So yes. So that's exactly why I do that. So let me just kind of go back here to kind of finish this up. So we did that demo. We talked about committing changes, highlighted, there's the source control button and all of that. We demonstrated how to do all of that. Then we walk through the entire life cycle. And so now let's just kind of go through what we covered today. So apologies for running a bit long, but we took a look at the overview of SQL Database and Fabric. We looked at how to create, DevOps repos, how to integrate the two systems together, how to create a build pipeline, a release pipeline, and then how to actually make an end-to-end change and deploy it. If you happen to want to connect with me on either one of these two social media places, making it easy for you. Here's a QR code that you can scan if you'd like. And then at this point, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, thank you guys for your time.
That was a great job, Kevin. Thank you.